Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa, and today I am taking part in the Turquoise Challenge, started by Dina Tollefson. Dina is a very community-oriented art YouTuber, and I believe this is the second of her color challenges, where she picks a color and any art YouTubers who want to join can do a piece heavily involving that color or oriented around that color, and we all upload on the same day and make a fun little event of it. So, since this is the Turquoise Challenge, my piece is going to be heavily involved with greens, blues, and mixes of those, and the only other colors I will be using will be grayscale. So, I've been planning this piece for a little while. The idea came to me a bit ago to do illustrations for my book because I enjoy other people's books that have illustrations so much, and since I am both a writer and an artist, it made sense that my book should have my own illustrations in them. So I picked out a few key scenes that would have interesting imagery that would be fun to paint and fun to look at, and this is actually the one that takes place first in the book. By the way, the one I'm talking about is the sequel to the one I've already published, so this is one I haven't published yet, but you'll get to see it at some point in the future. I actually had stopped working on this book for about 9 months because I had very bad writer's block with it, and the last time I had actually opened the document to try to edit it some more because I had the first draft done. But I needed to do some big structural edits. I actually started hyperventilating, so I just stopped for a while. But finally, the last couple of months, I've been feeling like maybe I could try again. And a few days ago, I actually edited maybe a couple of paragraphs at the very beginning of the story, and then 2 days later I edited a few more paragraphs, and then I edited a few more, and so I'm thinking I might actually get this book out maybe in the fall. So I'm really happy about that because it was very discouraging to be someone who loves writing so much and making stories so much to not be making any progress towards my goals in that area. But part of what actually got me to start again was thinking about these pieces. I guess it was sort of a safe way to approach the topic because I wasn't thinking about prose, which is what makes me the most nervous, like how my sentences are worded and whether they sound silly or not. I was thinking about the actual story itself and what happens and things like that. And I was thinking about the magical creatures that are in my books, which are pretty much my favorite parts of them. My favorite parts are the characters and the magical creatures. So thinking about the magical creatures and how I wanted to depict them and which parts of the story would do well with illustrations kind of brought me back to the love of this story and made me remember why I want to write it in the first place and why I want to share it with people. And so I think that's what made it okay for me to start working on my writing again. So I'm very happy about that. This piece in particular I decided to do for this challenge because as I was reading over my work, since I'd forgotten some of the specifics, I needed to reread the descriptions of the magical creatures before I could paint them. I was actually rereading the scene with this little horse in it that I was planning on painting, and the Turquoise Challenge had already been announced, so I kind of had that in the back of my head, and I read where I had written that this little horse had a turquoise mane. So obviously the word turquoise sparked the memory, and I was like, oh, this would be absolutely perfect to do for this challenge because I'm wanting to do this painting anyway and I wasn't sure what to do for it, so this is perfect. And so then along with that evolved the idea to put this in a combination of blue, green, and grayscale. And it works with the story because the scene involving this little horse is in a somewhat magical forest, and so I thought it would be cool if between the trees there would be kind of lights and glowing magicalness that you could see between the trees as they faded off into the distance. I thought the grayscale would go really well with making it look sort of hazy and misty and slightly otherworldly. And then of course the scene has the little horse standing in a stream and with grass all around, so that works well with the blue and green. And also I've really enjoyed pieces that have a limited palette, so I decided that would be a good way to go with this one. So I returned to a method for painting trees that I had figured out for my magical doorway a while ago, which I enjoyed a lot, both the act of painting that piece and also watching the video of it. I found the painting of the stripes on the trees very relaxing to watch, and I also really like the finished product, so I went with that method again. And for the stream, which was something I was quite nervous about because I feel like I'm not very good at painting water, one of the main ways that I put extra work and extra carefulness into this piece was I did a lot more layering than usual. Like a lot of times I'll try to go for almost the correct color the first layer I use so that I don't have to go over it again because that's more work. So I'll mix the colors on a palette and then put them on the page. But for this piece I kept almost all my first layers very light, so that if I made a mistake it would be fixable on the second layer, but I would kind of have a guide for putting down the second layer. And also I could see the colors on the page and see what different kind of colors I wanted to add to them. So I was putting down my first layer for the stream, and I wanted it to be kind of mixing and flowing and moving around a lot, so I did very wavy lines. And I also left some white spots, especially around the rocks, because the water bends extra there, so the light plays off it extra, and also there's sometimes little bubbles and foam when they hit the rocks. And so while I was still on my first layer of that, I actually thought that looked really good, and I really liked how the rocks and the water really looked like rocks and water without being necessarily accurate. They were kind of impressionistic, and I really enjoyed how that looked, so I decided to continue with that theme with the further layers. I kept just adding more blues and streaky and swirling it around, and made sure to leave some of those white spaces, because in the past I've often used white acrylic paint or white pens to go over top of things where I need to add white, instead of leaving it white from the beginning, because that's kind of harder to do. So this was new for me, but very much a watercolor technique that's used a lot, just letting the white paper shine through. And that's what I actually ended up doing for the little horse as well. I ended up having the highlights of the little horse be white, and then everything that wasn't highlight would be slightly shadowed, and then deeper shadows. So I had to look up a picture of a horse to do that, because this is actually the first horse I've painted. So I had to figure out where the shadows would go. I knew a few of them, but some of them were also surprises. So I figured out where the shadows would go and put them on with a light sparkly blue wash, because it's a magical horse. Which was some of the handmade watercolors from Violet Connie Art, who I'll link below. She makes really nice watercolors. And she sent me some, so I really like them. And so that's what the base layer is of what I did on the little horse. And then I went back and added darker shadows with some darker blue paint that I had. One decision that actually came to me as I was doing the painting as tends to happen to me a lot, was I decided not to do any line work, which is very unusual for me. I pretty much always do some line work. On my Cannon Beach painting that I did recently, I didn't have any line work, but I did have some acrylic paint to do the surf on the water and little birds and things like that. But since I enjoyed how loose that was, and also because I was doing very much a fully watercolor style on the stream, it would have looked really strange to have ink on that part because it would have made the shapes very defined, and whereas the reason they looked good was because they were undefined. And so I wasn't sure about using pens to outline the little horse and not using them on the stream. I thought it might look weird. So I thought about it as I was working on the little horse, and I started firming up the edges of the horse, so like going around and making sure that every little bit of the outline of the horse was where it was supposed to be, because I hadn't quite gone up to my penciled in lines with most of my background colors. I had just gotten close to them, so I went around the edges and firmed those up and made them all in the right place so that the horse's shape would stand out by being white and light blue as opposed to by being outlined. And I still wasn't sure it was going to work because the details of the horse weren't strong enough. It was just sort of fading into the background, and that's actually when I added the deeper shadows with the darker blue. And then I remembered that on some of my older pieces I would use a very, very small brush with dark paint on it to make lines instead of using ink, and so I decided to do that again. I got some nice dark greeny blue paint on my itsy bitsy paintbrush and did what line work I thought I needed with that. So the main line work I needed was around the eye, because that's kind of the most important facial feature, and then I did a little bit more on the face to make there's this sort of outlined, I guess it's a cheekbone that horses have on their faces. So I put that on with that dark paint, and I did a little more around her mouth and nose, and I used that tiny brush to add the dark shadows so that I could do it very accurately. And then I also added the darker strands to the horse's mane and tail with that, because before I added those darker strands, the tail and mane were really fading in to the rest of the horse in the background. So that added a lot to it. And then I did go in with a white gel pen, but I don't feel like that messed up the look at all. I think that pretty well maintained the watercolor look of the whole piece. The most important part with my white gel pen that I always do is adding the highlights to the eyes, because the eyes just, if they don't have white highlights, they tend to look kind of dead. So it really livens up the eyes to put those on there. And then I just added a few streaks of highlights to the mane and tail for little bits of hair that were catching the light. Get out of it. And so that is my watercolor turquoise challenge piece. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!